Let's just jump right in. Today, we're unpacking an analysis of a truly terrifying, true horror story. We're going to break down the exact minute-by-minute sequence of events, mapping out how a completely ordinary, everyday situation devolved into absolute supernatural chaos. So, settle in, because the details of this story, they're going to stay with you long after we're done. So how did a simple school trip turn into a nightmare that literally left two students dead? It's a completely jarring thought, right? What starts as an innocent fun trip to Shimla, just teenagers, teachers, and that classic excitement of a getaway, ends in this gruesome, totally inexplicable tragedy. To understand how things went so completely off the rails, we really need to look at the chain of decisions these kids made and the incredibly specific geography of where they ended up. Section 1. The terrifying night of the school trip. Okay, so picture this. Late at night, their school bus breaks down. Standard bit of luck, right? This forces the teachers to check the students into this remote, kind of isolated hotel surrounded by towering mountains and a really dense, dark forest. For three friends, Aman, Rohan, and Ayu, sharing a room felt super exciting. But that excitement quickly morphed into a fatal curiosity. Looking out their hotel window, they spotted a lake nestled deep down in the forest. And they remembered this local legend of two kids from a previous trip who snuck out to a similar lake, took some photos, and became overnight legends at school. Hubris totally took over. Their plan was, frankly, incredibly naive. Just wait for the hotel guard to fall asleep, sneak out to the lake, snap some proof, and sneak back in to become the most popular kids in school. It seems straightforward enough, but as you'll see, appearances in the dark are wildly deceiving.
Section 2. That terrifying path through the forest.
Right. So once the guard finally dozed off, the three boys slipped outside into the biting cold. Now, from the window, the lake had looked relatively close. But the second they stepped into the tree line, everything changed. 30 minutes in, they are just walking endlessly into this freezing, pitch-black forest. The path is literally going nowhere. At the 45-minute mark, the reality of their isolation really hits them. They check their phones, zero signal, nothing. The cold is getting unbearable, the dark is suffocating, so they finally make the smart call to turn back. But then we hit the 50-minute mark. Adaman and Ayu turn around to say something to Rohan, and he's gone. Completely vanished. And in the dead silence of those woods, they suddenly hear these frantic, running footsteps nearby.
I want you to put yourself in their shoes for a second. You're lost, you're freezing, your phone is a brick, and your best friend is missing. But Aman and Ayu made a crucial and honestly fatal choice here. They absolutely refused to run away and leave Rohan behind. They tracked those footsteps, which suddenly stopped, only to be replaced by this rhythmic, heavy sound. The sound of someone or something digging a pit deep in the brush. Creeping up to the bushes, they peeked through the branches and, sure enough, they found Rohan. But he wasn't acting like the friend they knew.
They called out to him, completely terrified. The digging immediately stopped. Rohan slowly turned around to face them, just glaring with this unnatural, intense rage. And his eyes were completely pitch black. The source material describes it as if his actual eyeballs had literally been scooped out, leaving these hollow, dark voids staring right back at them.
Aman, just trying to be a good friend, stepped forward and put a hand on Rohan's shoulder to ask what was wrong. But that tiny moment of contact, it triggered something incredibly violent. Rohan screamed and shoved Aman. Actually, scratch that, it wasn't just a shove. It was this unnatural, explosive force that sent Aman flying backwards. Ayu rushed over to help Aman, while Rohan suddenly dropped to the ground, suffering violent seizures before collapsing unconscious. Ayu is frantically trying to wake Aman up, and when Aman finally lifts his drooping head to look at Ayu, his eyes, too, were now completely pitch black. The entity had transferred. Totally possessed, Aman sprang to his feet and sprinted blindly deep into the woods.
Section 3. The Scene of Terror in the Ruins.
So now Ayu, along with a newly conscious, deeply disoriented Rohan, is chasing their possessed friend through the dense trees, and they stumble upon this ancient, decaying ruin totally hidden deep within the forest. It looked like it hadn't been touched by human hands for decades. Forcing themselves inside, look, what they found completely defies logic. They walked into an absolute nightmare. Aman was suspended there, literally floating, completely unconscious in midair. And hovering right near him was a terrifying old woman. Her face was horrific. Her skin was hanging loosely right off her bones. She had this wild, messy white hair, and she possessed the exact same pitch-black, hollow eyes they had just seen in their friends.
The sheer shock of it all finally broke their paralysis. Ayu and Rohan bolted for the door. But as they reached the exit, they made the classic, fatal mistake of looking back. The old woman wasn't just following them, she was crawling down the stone stairs on all fours, moving with these unnatural, rapid, scuttling motions, exactly like a giant insect. The visceral terror of that image sent the boys into a blind, desperate sprint through the dark forest. They had zero sense of direction. It was just pure survival instinct.
Section 4. The Cursed Lake and Death.
Running blindly through the woods, frantically trying to escape this entity, they broke through the tree line and found themselves exactly where they had wanted to go in the first place, the lake. But it was a complete trap. In the pitch darkness, both Ayu and Rohan tumbled directly into the freezing water. And instantly they felt it, this heavy, unmistakable supernatural force wrapping around them, dragging them downwards into the freezing depths. Ayu fought with literally everything he had, tearing himself away from this unseen grip, and he barely managed to drag himself up onto the muddy shore. But Rohan wasn't so lucky. Ayu had to watch, completely and utterly helpless, as his friend was pulled under the dark water for the final time. The psychological toll of witnessing that, mixed with the sheer terror of the night, caused Ayu to completely black out.
2. That is the number of bodies Ayu saw when he finally opened his eyes. But he didn't wake up by the lake. No, he woke up the very next morning, perfectly safe, tucked into his hotel room bed. Disoriented and panicked, he rushed outside only to find police teams absolutely swarming the hotel grounds. And right there, lying on the cold ground, were two bodies covered in stark white sheets, Aman and Rohan, both dead. Section 5. The Dark Truth of That Night.
So what actually happened out there? To truly grasp the severity of this analysis, we have to look past the immediate trauma and dig into the dark history of that specific patch of forest. You see, the official police report closed the book super quickly. They declare the deaths a simple murder, maybe a tragic accident, or some sort of foul play out in the woods. But the locals, the villagers who lived in the shadow of that mountain, oh, they knew the terrifying truth. They knew exactly why the police report was wrong and why absolutely no one from their village ever set foot near that lake after dark.
Here's what really went down. In the past, an old woman lived peacefully, entirely alone in a small house deep within that forest. Then came the incident. Men from a neighboring village decided they wanted her land, and they didn't just evict her. They brutalized her, they murdered her, and to hide the evidence, they dumped her body into that exact same lake. This horrific injustice birthed the present reality. The locals firmly believe her vengeful spirit is permanently bound to the woods and the water. She haunts the ruins of her stolen home, ruthlessly hunting down and killing anyone foolish enough to trespass on her territory in the dead of night. If Osman, Rohan, and Ayu had just known the history of the land, well, 3 boys would have gone home instead of 1.
Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder. What would you do if you were in Ayu's place? Would you have turned back earlier when the signal died, or would you have followed those digging sounds into the dark? This entire tragedy stemmed from a simple, very human desire to bend the rules and impress some classmates. So, the next time you think about breaking the rules just to look a little bit cooler, knowing the dark histories that might be lurking just out of sight, ask yourself, is it really worth the risk? Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Stay curious, and most importantly, stay safe.